Hi everybody, it's Cole from Cole's Quilts, and this is how far we are along in the Kaleidoscope Owl Quilt Along. I thought I would make a little video just to sort of show you how far along we are, but also I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that I labeled the colors. Because as I'm doing it, and from some of the questions I've gotten from other people, I realized there's a lot of room for interpretation, and so I wanted to kind of give you guys some information that might help make it easier for you when you're making decisions about the colors to use. I recently have created a Teachable website for myself where you can sign up for my online classes. Right now, the only one that's up is the one that I've had before that is about an hour of videos going over how to design your own foundation paper piecing quilts in Inkscape. Soon, there will be a very beginning foundation paper piecing course that will really walk you through how to do foundation paper piecing if you're an absolute beginner. And that includes a 15 by 15 inch small pattern that I work you through so that you can start with something that only has two pieces and then sort of work up to more complex blocks. And then in the future, I'm going to be adding other courses. For example, one on like color theory. So this is going to be almost sort of like a little intro to color theory. The reason why I wanted to make this video and why there's room for interpretation when it comes to this quilt along is that, number one, I didn't design this quilt pattern for there to be certain colors and a certain number of fabrics. If I had done that, it would have been different. I could have been very specific about these are the exact fabrics that you need. But this quilt pattern is designed for you to use scraps. So the idea is you're working with what you have, and you're making choices based on what you have. And so with that in mind, I labeled the block colors so that you can have a basic idea of what they are, and then you can choose a fabric that fits that the best based on what you have. The challenge is that all of this is a spectrum. So, for example, the Greyscale. Now, I have another video on Greyscale, which I'll link below if you want to understand what Greyscale is. But the idea of Greyscale is sort of like if I take a picture and I put a black and white filter on it, you'll see, like, if I took this and I put a black and white filter on it, which colors would look lighter and which colors would look darker, and then we give that a number, right? So, for example, 10 is like white, 1 is like black. So 5, 6, you're sort of like gray in the middle. And so when you look at the blocks, it'll say, oh, this one's a 5 and this one's a 4 and this one's a 7. It's helpful. Is it perfect though? Well, not necessarily, because from black to white and all the grays in between is a spectrum. So if we break it down to 1 through 10, there's still a spectrum within each of those numbers. So for example, 5, you could have many shades within 5, right? I mean, and I could get really specific and start calling things 5.5, 5.6, 5.7, but I feel like that would make it too complex. So you may see some where there's like a 4 here and a 4 there and they don't look exactly the same, but that's because they're all within the range of 4. Like, they're darker than a 5, but they're lighter than a 3, so I'm calling them a 4, but they might not exactly be the same. Keep that in mind when you're making your color choices, because first of all, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to match exactly. Just as long as it matches generally. So even within that Greyscale, giving it a number, and also I've noticed like with between the 8s and 9s, there are some where it's like, ooh, is it an 8 or a 9? And so there are 8s that are lighter and 8s that are darker. But they're within the range of 8. They're not as light to be a 9. They're not dark enough to be a 7. Okay. So that's the first part that I wanted you to know. The second thing is the tones. So I put little circles that have the actual color on it, if you can print it in color and see that and just do it with your eyes. But then I also labeled a number for the Greyscale, so how light or dark it is, right? And then I put letters for the tone. So tone is warmth or coolness of a color. For example, when you hear things like red, orange, yellow, blue, those are tones, right? Whereas the lightness or darkness is the value. So you could have a red that's dark and you could have a red that's light. Red that's really light is pink. red that's in the middle, like a bright red, like a fire truck red, would sort of be in the middle. And then darker red can start to look a little bit like brick, or like it starts looking brownish. Now, there's an interesting reason for this. Think about if I had something red like this, and you look at it right now in this light, and it looks pretty bright red. But if I were to turn the lights off, here's with less lights, here's with less light, here's with less light. So you can see how this red looks less red when there's less light. If the lights were completely off, you wouldn't even see red. That's because we see color by light reflecting off of objects. And the different wavelengths of color that reflect off the objects determines what we see. Now, you don't need to totally understand that to be able to understand what I'm saying. But that's the first thing I want you to understand, is that you will see certain tones look the brightest at certain lightnesses, right? So, for example, yellow looks the most yellow at somewhere between an 8 and a 9. If you make yellow darker, it starts to look brownish or tan. Red looks the most red between a 6 and a 7. If you go lighter, it looks pink. Like I said, you go darker, it looks brown. Blue looks the bluest, a little bit darker, right? This is kind of naturally darker color. So that's one thing that you sort of have to keep in mind. So if something looks really dark and I've labeled it as green or blue and you think, well, it doesn't look very green or blue, then keep in mind that like the amount of tone in it is small because it's darker or because it's so light that it looks pastel, right? Now there is one last concept that I want you to think about that's connected to all this, and that is the intensity. A red, even if you had a red that was the same value, so let's say it was a 6, you could have a high intensity 6, a medium intensity 6, or a low intensity 6. What that means, high intensity 6 means 100% red. All you see is red. Low intensity 6 would be like, this looks pretty neutrally, maybe like brownish, tannish, but it also has some red to it. So I might call it red, but I might call it brown. I might call it red, brown. And this is one of the reasons, this is why people have so many like words for colors. I think a way a lot of average people deal with this is they just give every single version of a color a different name. But I think that it's helpful to understand all the versions of that, right? Like, I think that it's helpful to understand that red-brown is just a lower intensity of red. I mean, it's more complex than that. But anyways, here's another example. High intensity blue, medium intensity blue, low intensity blue. Now, I did not label the intensities because I just feel like, honestly, that would just be too much. You'd have, for the average person to see all these different labels. So basically what I did is if it was pretty clear what the tone was, then I labeled it. Now, the things that didn't have clear tones were either labeled GA for gray, BR for brown, or T for tan. And this is where I think some of the confusion can get in. There are some that I labeled T that were sort of like yellowy based, like this one. And there are some that I labeled T that are sort of reddish based, like this one. And then some that sort of lean more towards gray. So if you feel confused that there's a 6T, that we have 3 or 4 different 6Ts that look different, that is why. It's because if the tone wasn't strong enough, if it was leaning towards a low intensity tone, then I just thought, I'm just going to put it with the neutrals, the tans and browns. And so some of them are a little bit, have some red undertones, some have some yellow undertones, some have some orange undertones. But I figured, it's neutral enough. I'm just going to call it neutral. And then you can decide. So if you want to just look at the little circles where the colors are and try to match a fabric to it, that's great. If you feel like that's too challenging, that's what these other labels are for. But basically, I wanted to do this to explain why some of the colors that are labeled the same look slightly different. Now, if you wanted to just purely go by the labels and not worry about the fact that some of the circles look a little bit different, it's still going to look like an owl. Like I said before, as long as you use the grayscale, even if you used completely different tones, it would still look like an owl. You just, whatever way you want to do it, you want to make sure that you are consistent throughout, and then you will see that you'll still get the same end result. You sort of have to trust the process, because when you're doing it, it can feel a little bit like, I'm just putting a bunch of random colors together. And then you hang it up and you go, oh, it's an owl. So I'm really excited to see all the different versions of this quilt that we're going to have in the Facebook group, which I'll link down here if you want to join it. People have been posting their progress, and we're getting a lot of different versions. We have people doing it with solids, we have people do it with prints, we have people do it with batiks, and some are leaning towards more neutral and some are leaning towards higher intensity colors. It just depends on the scraps that you have. If you haven't joined and you want to join, you can still join. You can download the pattern and the blocks on my website, which is updated weekly with 4 new blocks, or you can join the Facebook group where I will also be posting the blocks and you can see other people posting their work. And when it is done, I'll post another video, and I'm hoping to put together all the images of different examples of this pattern that people did so that we can see them all together. So if you want to quilt with us, come quilt with us. Happy quilting.